With the global situation being what it is, and there being a shortage of new movies and TV to review, what with productions being shut down and delayed, I've been having to reach a lot further than usual to find stuff to talk about. Well, Netflix to the rescue. Because there's something that recently dropped on Netflix that I know you guys have just been dying to see me cover on the channel. Something that absolutely everyone has been talking about lately. Something that at any waking moment is right on the tip of every single person's tongue. Something that people absolutely cannot seem to get enough of. That's right, Code 8. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Code 8 takes place in a city where a small percentage of the population are born with superhuman abilities, and are thus ostracized and mistrusted by normal humans. They're victims of prejudice, laws are put in place that restrict what they can and can't do, forcing some of them to turn to crime to make ends meet. Sound familiar? Well, yeah. The film stars Robbie and Stephen Amell, with Robbie playing a powered person whose mother is dying of a terminal illness. And since the restrictive laws make it difficult for people like him to get jobs, he joins up with a gang of powered criminals run by Stephen to make money to pay for his mom's medical expenses, and then things inevitably go very wrong. Code 8 feels like what would happen if you crossed an X-Men movie with a Neil Blomkamp movie, slashed the budget down to almost nothing, and then cast two guys best known for their work in the CW's DC Arrowverse as the leads, because irony. By all rights, the inexplicable Frankenstein hodgepodge of different elements probably shouldn't work, and yet surprisingly, I kinda like this movie. Now, I'm not saying it's a work of art or anything. There's nothing terribly original here. It's borrowing very heavily from some pretty obvious sources. The stylistic similarities to Blomkamp's movies are hard to ignore, and the people with powers are basically just mutants without the name. But being derivative of other things doesn't necessarily have to kill your movie, provided the execution is good. And more than anything, the execution not only saves the movie, but actually makes it pretty enjoyable. And ironically, one of the things that was initially working against it, that being the small budget, ends up working in its favor. Stephen and Robbie Amell apparently crowdfunded this thing, and they shot it on a budget of a little over $2 million. So because they didn't have the money to do a lot of big set pieces and whatnot, they had to get more creative. And this is where the execution comes in, because when you don't have tons of expensive CG or action scenes to hang your hat on, you have to rely more heavily on an engaging story and characters to hold the audience's interest. And this is something that Code 8 does fairly well. Even though there isn't much originality on display, there was clearly some thought put into how the world and the characters work. They even accomplish what, in current year, is the very impressive task of doing social commentary without coming off as blunt or preachy. The powered people are obviously a metaphor for something, and you can draw your own conclusions on that, but the movie doesn't beat you over the head with it. And I don't know that it really takes one political side or the other with it either. It presents an issue that is meant to represent something else, but I never felt that it was trying to teach the audience a ham-fisted lesson with it or push some kind of agenda. It was just using this situation to tell a story. And the story is pretty refreshing, actually. They made some interesting choices here that I didn't expect. For example, once Robbie Amell's character joins up with these criminals, he meets this girl Nia, who is also working for them. And I immediately figured that she'd just be some stereotypical love interest and not have much else to her, but then it turns out to be more complicated than that, which I appreciated. And the story with Robbie Amell's mother takes a turn I didn't think they'd have the guts to do either. I thought it would take a fairly typical route and just wrap things up nice and neat, but it doesn't. It makes a bolder choice and goes in a different direction in the interest of furthering the characters more than they would have been otherwise. Creative choices like these really help keep the movie afloat despite the lack of money they had to work with. In fact, the biggest set piece in the film is just a shootout in a city street. And even though there isn't a lot of action or superpowers, it doesn't want for more of that stuff. The lack of money means things like these need to be used very conservatively, but it also means that when people do use their powers, it matters, and it's done to inform something about the scene. It's not done just for eye candy. Basically, they were saving their money for things the movie absolutely needed. And the good news is that when they get to those things, they make those dollars count. The powers all look good, even if they are used on a small scale. There are these robot drones used to police powered humans, and at first I wasn't sure if these robots were CG'd or people in suits, but it looked like a big chunk of money was spent on making the robots look really convincing and intimidating, and they do. Of course, none of that would matter much if there was no emotion behind it, and that's also something the movie pulls off pretty well. The main through line is Robbie Amell trying to make enough money to save his mom, and there's nothing here that I would call a tearjerker really, but the actors have a nice chemistry, you care about their relationship, and the story is emotionally affecting what it needs to be, as is the story with the Nia character as well. The movie does have heart. It's not an emotional tour de force or anything, but it's there, and that counts for something. I watched Code 8 on Netflix because I was just bored one night, not expecting much more than a way to kill 90 minutes, but I ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. The characters are likable, the story may be derivative of other things, but it's told well enough, and they make some creative choices that I wouldn't have expected of them and actually kind of commend them for. The only thing holding it back was that it was shot on such a tight budget, so they had to make do with what they had, but turns out they had more than you might think. This movie deserves more attention in my opinion, and I think people should give it a chance if they haven't seen it yet because this project did a lot with very little, and I have to respect that. I'd be interested in seeing a Code 8 sequel, honestly. With the way it ended, there's definitely potential for one, and if this movie works out and they do get a sequel, I'd like to see what this team could do in a second go-around and more money to work with. Guys, let me know what you thought of Code 8 in the comments below. Ding that bell icon and follow me on Twitter using the link in the description so you'll always know when I upload new videos. Also, while you're here, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because far more destructive than any powered person in this movie is the oppressive power of the YouTube algorithm. Thanks for watching, do all the things, and I'll be back soon with more videos. Until then, stay safe, wash your hands, and I'll see you next time.